When I think of how a cops versus robbers game should play out, I don't think of Battlefield. I don't think of Payday's zombie horde mode of cops. I don't think of the high-speed chases and wacky humor of GTA. I think of games that have difficult, demanding gameplay with fast deaths that carry high consequences. I think of games that don't indulge in a gratuitous fantasy of violence, but rather ask the player to respect and fear violence. I think of games like Rainbow Six. And I'm not talking about the cover systems and the regenerating health of the more recent Rainbow Six games, because 15 years ago, this series played very differently from how it does now. In fact, nothing before or after the first 3 Rainbow Six games really compares to them. Because back in 1998, Rainbow Six burst onto the market to slap every other FPS off your shelf and say, no, that's not how it works. Rainbow Six was not a fantasy. It evoked realism. What was unusual for 1998 was that guns had to be reloaded, ammo was not all pooled together, your crosshairs blew up while you were moving, and your strafing and backpedaling were extremely slow. Levels would have 12 enemies instead of 200, and combat began and ended in an instant. But one feature that never became standardized, and also defined the entire experience, was that everybody died in usually one shot. The rules of death were universal for both the good guys and the bad guys, and that meant you had to play carefully. Winning wasn't about dodging bullets and enduring high damage, it was about tactical movement, about prioritizing your sightlines and concentrating on your surroundings as much as possible. It was about strategizing to make sure you had more guns pointed in the direction of bad guys than they had pointed at you. But since every mission pit you against a greater number of them waiting for you, that meant they always had the defensive advantage. It's so unlike any other shooter today, and also from shooters back then. According to man made Rainbow Six 3 happen in 2003, and as good as the previous game was, it did not get better than this. Rainbow Six 3 was not just a graphical overhaul, but also the swan song of the series. The series did not get better than this because it only got worse than this. You had all the complexity and depth of the previous games, but planning was streamlined so that it took less clicks to accomplish the same moves. And there was finally a real-time squad-based ordering system for once. The level and AI design didn't feel so desolate in this one. You could assign team orders and waypoints within the mission. You could improvise new strategies when things went wrong and pull off elaborate tactics that were impossible to do in planning. They also added in a weapon customization system, which was kinda superficial since, once again, there's no reason not to use silencers on everything, but one thing that I really wish caught on was this fluid leaning system where you hold a modifier key and move the mouse to control head movement. And I also love how you can partially open and close doors. It's actually pretty rough playing other shooters after getting used to those 2 moves. But soon enough, Rainbow Six steadily became like other shooters. Rather than retaining the character of the new games is absolutely nothing like the earlier ones. The Vegas games weren't bad, they were competently made, but they were so much less of a novelty, so much less compelling and involving than the older ones. They didn't fill a unique hole in the market so much as they capitalized on being an alternative to Gears of War. The older games were thinking man shooters in comparison. They required you to slow down and think about the long-term consequences of what you were doing, instead of just having you respond to shooting gallery stimulus. Vegas was where the series swapped out the quiet, slow, and cerebral tone of its brand for a cartoony, high-octane Michael Bay approach to violence that is ultimately more clean and inoffensive than what they started with. But Rainbow Six 1-3 are a hell of a lot more raw. You learn as you play to go into fights ready to react in an instant, to put less lives at risk, and to cause as little damage as possible. The mechanics convey dire consequences for failure. They keep you aware of how fast a flawless plan can go wrong. You learn how to circumvent incredible danger in the safest and most efficient way possible. The older Rainbow Six games teach you to fear and respect violence, but in the new games, you just indulge in a gratuitous fantasy of